Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us and viewing. Today, we want to talk about the 10 critical success factors in SAFE, but not just the success factors. We want to talk about how do they apply to leadership? What do leadership need to know? Why do they need to get engaged? How do they help a SAFE implementation by understanding these critical success factors? So we've got a pretty simple agenda. We're going to go a very quick rapid fire overview of the 10 critical success factors. I'm going to present that. And then my partner in crime, John Miller, is going to introduce how does leadership get involved? What do they need to know? What do they need to understand? What do they need to understand? And what's the call to action? How do we get leadership to really understand what they need to do to help move forward? And with that, I want to introduce my partner, John Miller, who is going to be introducing the leadership portion. John?
Hey, I'm John Miller. Been an SPCT for a while and working at the art level, at the portfolio level, and with leadership, figuring this stuff out and helping organizations get better flow of value.
Thanks, John. And my name is Dwayne Stroman. I'm an SPCT with Unicus Solutions. And as I said, let's start off with the 10 critical success factors. So why are they critical? I like to tell my clients and students that here's the reality, the cold, hard truth. If you're not implementing these 10 success factors, you're not actually implementing SAFE. And a lot of companies are really struggling with their SAFE implementation, their rollout, and they don't understand why. They're not getting the value, they're not getting the flow of value, they're not getting the efficiency, the productivity, the quality that they expected, and they don't understand why. Very often, if not perhaps all the time, it's because they've missed one or more of these critical success factors. So let's do a quick review of these before we go into the leadership aspect. Number one, SAFE Lean Agile principles. These principles are founded on a slew of industry information or from industry experts, people like Donald Reinertson, Chip and Dan Heath, Daniel Pink, a number of different people that have done very deep dive work into various efforts. And what Scaled Agile has done is really done a great job of codifying that together and turning those into principles that we can all follow. Using those principles and continuing to use those to adjust the framework as you move forward is one of the critical success factors. Another one is having real Agile teams and trains. And I want to emphasize real. You notice the italics we've got added. They're founded on real value streams. Very often when we come into organizations that are struggling with SAFE, one of the key reasons, if not the key underlying factor, is the organization has not done their value stream identification. And so they don't know what the Agile release trains need to be to organize around value. They miss that critical component of understanding not only their operational value streams, but their development value streams. And so when they structure their arts, yes, they're getting to the 7 plus or minus 2 people. They're getting those people, those teams together into a collection. And that's really what it is. It's a collection because they can't properly flow value because the teams are formed around organizational silos, common skill sets, different anti-patterns like that. That's where the struggle really comes in, is not understanding the underlying need to understand your value streams, to visualize them and organize around them. Cadence and synchronization is another key one. Once you get those teams organized correctly around flow of value, now you need to get the teams working on a common cadence and synchronized together. This is one thing that teams tend to push back on at first because they think, well, wait, Agile isn't supposed to be that structured and that disciplined. And why is it we have to be on the same cadence? Well, in reality, Agile and especially Lean is actually quite disciplined. And the cadence and synchronization is absolutely vital to integrate those learning cycles. As one team is moving forward on something, it needs to integrate and boost the learning, augment the learning, accelerate the learning of the other teams on the art and vice versa. So if they're not on the same cadence, meaning it's simple as having a common iteration length, and then synchronized, meaning, hey, those iteration sprints are starting and stopping on the same day, same length, same day. Now we can have real system demos where every team is able to contribute to the system. We can see the learning that we've done over the last 2 weeks, let's say, have that clear learning cycle and adjustment together as a team of teams, not a collection of teams. PI planning. As Dean Leffingwell likes to say, if there's any magic to scaled agile, it's this. It's PI planning. It's understanding how to bring these people together, this team of teams, again, not a collection, but this team of teams with leadership to understand what are the opportunities in front of us. What have we learned from the previous PI, that planning increment, planning interval, and what is it we're going to do next? One of the key things to PI planning, though, this is a discovery session. It's not a readout. It's not something where you come with a predefined plan. You have a strategy, you have a direction, you have a roadmap, but the plan is actually discovered during PI planning, which, as John is going to talk about later, not only is it critical for the teams to be there, it's critical for leadership to be there, 100% engaged. Customer centricity, DevOps, release on demand, all of these come together to help us understand, are we focused on the customer? Are we delivering to the customer as efficiently as we possibly can? And one of the keys to that is, are we releasing on demand? In other words, are we recreating a lean product development process that relies on pull? Are the customers pulling from us? And in reality, what that means is when we deliver things to production and then we choose to release it, we separate deployment from release. But when we deliver that to our customers and it's actually released, are they consuming it? And because we do it in small batches, we learn very quickly we're not releasing the right thing. We need to adjust and pivot. That's how we incorporate the pull system. If customers aren't pulling, we're not producing the right thing. Let's talk about system demos. System demos is one of the most vital components of the PI itself, the planning interval. Having these incremental demos throughout the PI at the end of every iteration, coming together and seeing how the system has advanced. And I like to tell a joke when I'm working with clients and students. There's only one group in the world that can use Microsoft PowerPoint for a system demo, and that's the Microsoft Office team, because that's their system. Demonstrate your system. And it's not about having each team get up one at a time and show their features or their progress. This is not a progress check. It's not a what work did you get done. This is, how is the system advanced? What does that tell us? And how does that reflect and inform us for the next iteration? Now, inspect and adapt. So we've done these iterations on a cadence together. We've been synchronized through this real agile teams and trains. And we've gone through multiple iterations, typically 4 or 5 with the IP iteration. And we come into that IP iteration and the innovation and planning iteration. And there's a component in there where we say, okay, we've done a lot of work. Let's say it's been 10 weeks. How can we improve? The first thing we want to do is a PI system demo. That's a large delta from the last PI. So that's potentially 10 weeks worth of effort. Let's look at how the system has advanced over the last 10 weeks, a large delta. And then as we do that, let's look at the metrics and the measurements, and both observational and quantitative and qualitative. Let's look at those measurements and see, how are we doing with that? We saw some good things in the system demo. PI system demo. We saw some things wish we could have done better. What do the metrics tell us of how we can improve? And then we take those opportunities into a problem-solving workshop, still a part of this inspect and adapt component, this event, and use that to learn what things do we want to do in the next PI to get better. Relentless improvement, finding those Kaizen opportunities. Speaking of the IP iteration, this is a full iteration dedicated, set aside for improvement, innovation, planning preparation. It's the sharpening the tools and preparing for the next PI. The biggest kickback or pushback we get on the IP iteration is from leaders not understanding the importance of it, thinking that it's 2 weeks for the teams to do whatever they want. And that's not what it is. The innovation part is critical, allowing the teams time to innovate and figure out new ways to solve problems, clear defects, collaborate, work together, whatever it might be. And that time that's set aside during the IP iteration, it's not the whole iteration, but that time set aside during it turns out with all kinds of new fixes, new opportunities, more efficiencies, all kinds of really important things that more than pay for themselves. Also, part of the IP iteration is the planning part. So not only do we do PI planning during the IP iteration, but we do a little bit more deep dive planning preparation. The teams have a time to look through the features, see what's upcoming, a little bit more deep dive. They're understanding they're doing some prototyping, understanding a little bit more depth, the roadmap and the strategy coming into PI planning. And then, as I mentioned, then we do PI planning in that IP iteration. Important to note, we plan for the next PI during the current PI in this IP iteration. A lot of I's and P's thrown around here, but it's critical to understand the importance of this one. And honestly, when John talks about this, you'll see this is one that leadership tend to struggle with perhaps the most. Architectural runway, having that clear footprint and roadmap of where we're going into the future, and allowing the balance where system architects are looking at the product opportunities. They're looking at the art backlog and saying, okay, from a business standpoint, here's the key areas we want to advance. Do we have the architectural capabilities to support those? And they're not doing just barely in time architecture. There's kind of a leapfrog game going on. So they're looking at the business opportunities coming up in the roadmap and the strategy and saying, yes, but we don't have the scalability. We don't have the security. We don't have whatever it might be to support that. So perhaps in this PI, we're going to bring in some enablers to build that out so that we can consume it in the next PI. So the architectural runway is always just one step ahead of the business strategy, but it's not 10 steps ahead to where we're building that ivory tower, gold-plated architecture that we really don't know if it's going to support business value or not. And finally, and this is one of the key ones, if not the key one, lean agile leadership. Getting leadership to understand their role in making this successful. And one of the huge pivots that leadership have to take in implementing SAFe and getting this lean agile mindset in place is understanding that their day, their work effort, their approach will change far more than the teams. They're going to be focused more on redesigning the system, improving culture, collaboration, helping with tooling, removing impediments, rather than work direction. Because when they build a better system, the teams are much better placed to pull the right work opportunities to deliver the business opportunities we're looking for. And so with that, I want to turn it over to John, and he's going to talk about, okay, so why is this a challenge for leadership?
For everybody, and it's interesting because as Dwayne flies through that stuff, I always have to go back and think, there's so much that we're talking about just in these critical success factors. It raises the importance of it to me to be talking about these a lot with senior leadership whenever we're working with companies and helping them understand what are the nuances that we're talking about. First one is it's this idea of management and leadership and where do we draw the line. There's this great chart. It's in Cotter's Accelerate book, for about 10 years ago now. It was published in 2012. But he put together this list that said, what is this difference between the kinds of things we do for management versus leadership? And management is the administration of all those things that leaders have led the way to do. But here's something really important. We really do need both sides. We need the administration, but we need leadership. And we really want to talk about leadership here to say, look, we need leadership always when we're doing a transformation, when we're moving forward to get better flow of value, because doing this is getting those folks in front and bringing all the people in your arts, in your value streams, in your lace all along. And got to admit, that includes the portfolio folks. There's a lot going on here, but we're focusing on that leadership side. So it's kind of interesting as Dwayne and I were talking about doing this, and we've been talking about doing this webinar for a month now. But just last week, there was this great article, and And it was written by Donna Wiggs, and it's actually published on Big Think. You can find it, and we've got that link on our Miro page. What's really happening here is Donna wrote this article and said, look, there are some skills that leaders need. And here's a list of 7 that are really in demand. They're things that are going on today. And it's all the things we're talking about in SAFE. If you're going through the articles, especially in the implementation roadmap, you're seeing these kinds of things coming out. And so again, this is supporting this need for leadership and getting leaders focused and involved all the time, not just flyovers. So as we were talking about these keys to leadership, and you notice we've got all 10 listed, but we changed the order. And it wasn't because we wanted them ordered. We're saying, gosh, if I could only talk about one, what's first? Always with principles, then go into leadership, real agile teams and trains again, then into PI planning, system demo, inspect and adapt, and then hitting the other principles, 3, 5, 8, and 9, just from a timing perspective. And, you know, always in thinking about this, you think, gosh, how do we have all these conversations all the time when people are saying, we don't have any time for another meeting to talk? So diving into it, and let's really think about this. We've got these lean agile principles, and what happens? Why is a leader involved, and what does it matter to them? And all over the place from a leadership perspective, we're talking about leaders should know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And in lean, really moving into that flow of value from a waterfall perspective, it's changing our mindset. And that's what we have to get to from a lean and agile perspective, is say, how do we think about flow first instead of our traditional methods? Traditional methods might be control gate, phase gate, stage gate, waterfall, other ideas that you use internally. But we want to think about flow of value and how do we promote that? And so as we start thinking about it, as senior leaders are thinking about how do I embrace these principles? Well, we've got to figure that out. And that's why we've always got to be working with leaders to talk about this is what it means from a lean perspective. And when you go through the SAFE principles, and yeah, we talk about 10 of them, but really, really important is the fundamentals that are built into these 10 principles literally help you and your organization create a lean product development system that now you control and you can improve. And that's this idea. How do we always go back to those principles? If we're making a choice, make a choice that's more flow oriented versus less, i.e. back to waterfall or control gate or phase gate. So embedding that lean thinking into everything we say and do. And to me, really importantly, and I learned this several years ago working with a client, is when we make a choice, gosh, we know we can't always be decent, much less perfect. And as a result of that, we've got to figure out, how do I capture this decision we made based on our current state? Might be an organizational need that you just can't get that much lean yet. But then, so we revisit it at the end of whether it's 1 PI or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is, so that you don't lose it. And we get into leadership. So this critical success factor number 10 is lean agile leadership, and getting folks that are leading the effort, those senior leadership teams, the real execs that are focused on this. How do we get them, how do we help have those conversations to do the right thing, to have them involved in? And you know, it's interesting because I'm going to bring something up from Cotter again to say in his Leading Change book, and again, that was a few years before Accelerate, but he said something really important about vision. And he said, most people in organizations get about 30 minutes a quarter of a vision about doing the right thing, about where the organization is going. So that lean agile leadership has always got to be focused on where are we going and why is it important. And if you're going to be doing lean, that's a big change in vision for a lot of folks. So we're always talking about that flow of value. How do we make it better? What are the impediments? What are the things we always have to think about? Something else that's really important in there as part of lean agile leadership is changing your mindset from being content focused to always be developing people, setting that up in your organization so that it works, helping your folks do the right thing in the right ways at the right time, including your decision. And every company needs to have a decent way to make decisions. We got to get people thinking that, using that for that long-term flow, and then let the great people that you hired do what they're supposed to do. So all of those things start to come into play for that leadership perspective. So critical success number 10 is lean agile leadership. We want to help leaders always understand what we're doing here. That moves us into that real agile teams and trains. And it's kind of interesting as Dwayne was talking about, and we talked about the value of understanding the foundation of real value streams. And this is a point where Dwayne and I are always thinking of is how do we always get better at identifying operational value streams and development value streams? And there's some discussion in there, and organizations don't always get that as good as they want to or need to in order to get better flow of value. And so in setting this up, we want to get leaders involved in those. When we have a value stream identification workshop, we want the highest level folks in your organization that are working with you to identify what are the groups involved, to really identify your operational value streams, so then you can figure out the real development value streams that support them. And once you get through that, and by the way, that's a really important discussion, because there's a lot of words out there around value streams. We see articles on it all the time, but that real key decision helps you understand what are the knowledge and skills that you need on your trains. And so at this point, having those senior execs involved increases your odds of getting the right folks on an art. In other words, all the knowledge and skills required to get flow from idea all the way to a user actually using your stuff, not just release, but getting that user involved. That takes senior management support and constant oversight. Because if you don't do that, if you have just, as an example, if you have dev and test, you kind of truncate the whole value stream, the development value stream. You're kind of missing some of the stuff up front and missing some of the stuff in back. So this idea of real teams relies on real agile trains, relies on real value streams. Huge conversations in there, and you want everybody involved. So, you know, if we have to make a decision this way today, how are we going to change it to get better flow tomorrow? So leadership is doing everything they can to support that creation. Well, once you do that and you're setting it all up, you're having all those discussions, but then one of the next things you get to is launching an art and then your cadence-based PI planning. So leaders, we need to get you involved actively in PI planning, not just dropping by for a discussion or two, but being there through the whole thing. By the way, if you're the business owners, there's that added requirement, the need that you're going to be standing up in front of the art and talking for a bit on day one. And I got to tell you, there's so many organizations that say, why does a business owner or exec have to talk for an hour? And it's interesting because if I go back to Cotter's message, and then other studies have been done, and these are published, there's all sorts of studies that talk about how somewhere on the order of 95% of the folks in any organization just don't get enough of a message from senior management about where they're going and why, the strategic themes and the vision. Well, PI planning is a place to connect that, to make sure that where the organization is aligned, where the organization is going, is aligned with what the arts are working on. And that comes out as in part of that executive briefing on day one. So senior managers are there, they're doing the briefing. We're also going to help them understand, hey, let's stop pushing work into the groups, let them pull. That's that whole demand versus capacity idea. But in order to do that decently, we've got to get the right folks in PI planning. In other words, everybody there. And in today's world, it could be in person. In other words, everybody's in a big room together, or everybody's on as an example right now, Zoom session, but then everybody's in a main room and all the breakout rooms and can flow back and forth in a frictionless manner to actually have those discussions that we would expect to have in person. I got to tell you, I can't tell you how many times I've been in PI planning events where I'm working with an exec, and to get to a team's breakout session, because somebody said, hey, can you come over here? We're changing rooms, and or maybe it's not Zoom, maybe it's another tool. It's got a little bit more friction to change breakout rooms. We're leaving one, we're signing back into another. Boy, it's hard to get them constantly involved in having those important discussions. And we need them in there because, trust me, even doing this decently, we're going to have some dependencies and impediments that we can't solve at the art level, and we need leadership's help. We need your help. We need your help figuring out how are we going to make this stuff better tomorrow. Who do we have to call? And gosh, everybody's got stories of this, but one I like to remind people of. I was working with a really large company, tens of thousands of folks. We were in a PI planning. It was in person. This was probably a year and a half ago. And we were talking about an impediment. Again, large company, lots of folks and vendors. Well, there was a problem with some vendors and getting stuff through the pipeline in 2022. And one of the global vice presidents said, I'll get on the phone and start talking to him. A big time impediment, GVP gets on the phone and starts solving these problems real time. That's why you want those execs around, to solve the impediments real time that maybe the folks in an art don't have the political capital to solve. So leadership, we want you involved in PI planning from start to finish. And then we get into system demos. So, you have PI planning, and the idea behind the system demo is at the end of every iteration, well, day 10, you've got the team demos. That's the team showing stories. But then shortly after that event, you've got a system demo, and that's demonstrating the system, the upgrade to the system. And heavens, again, senior leadership, we want you to attend as much as you can so you see what's basically been developed at the system level over the course of the last iteration. We want your help to promote these system demos and to help celebrate getting the fast feedback and all the learning that happens now every week or iteration after iteration. Well, in addition to that, we want your help making sure that people know you should be in here. So leadership, if you're telling folks, be in the system demos for the arts that you're on. Go to the system demos, participate, be part of the demonstration. If you got something done, great. If not, listen and learn something that you're going to apply the next week. And that includes a lot of different stakeholder groups. We hear a lot of folks from security, from operations, compliance folks, you name it. We want your help, leadership, to make sure that they're asked, they're begged to come into system demos, just to make sure that they're participating and they see where the system is at. And again, in system demos, we always hear of that next impediment. You have a demo that doesn't go so good. Okay, that's a fact of life. But sometimes there's a barrier that caused that. Hey, we had a dependency on a group over here, and we're operating within their SLA because they're still operating under your traditional model. How do you know that SLA exists and you're not fixing it? So sometimes that political capital of the leader helps solve those issues. Inspect and adapt. At the end of the PI, the last session of this PI before we go into PI planning for next PI. So from a leadership perspective, what help is really asked for, needed in INA? Again, your active participation. Use this as a place to learn about what went on in the last 10, 12 weeks, depending on how long your PI is. This is in lieu of. In other words, it'll replace those status meetings that maybe now you have every week or 2 weeks that you're asking people to go collect a bunch of metrics to report to you. That maybe if you're showing up in the inspect and adapt, it's an afternoon session, but it's all the stuff from the last quarter. And it's really the culmination of work over the course of the last PI. Well, once you get that, so you're going to see a last system demo. We actually call it the PI system demo. So it's the last one, culmination of all the good work. Plus, we're going to go through those metrics. You're going to get an idea of some problems that are affecting flow. And so this problem-solving session we talk about in the INA, the inspect and adapt, literally is to focus on how do we figure out the problem that if we solve it, it'll help our flow of value most. In leadership, there's some of those problems that are outside of the art's control. Again, your political capital is key in solving. Along with that is helping everybody know it's our responsibility to make flow better. It's not just theirs or theirs or theirs, it's ours as part of this inspect and adapt, as part of our art, as part of our improvement, as part of our always improving flow, and just always keeping that in mind. So we come out of the inspect and adapt with one really important idea that we're going to actually flow into the PI planning that's tomorrow. From a leadership perspective, what's a summary of stuff that we've talked about? That modeling aspect. Well, you've got to show what you want your people to do. And you doing it is going to help them know this is important to you. So you're modeling the behavior that you hope to cause to occur in your organization. You're going to teach other folks how to become leaders. By the way, there's great material out here. Marquet's books, Turn the Ship Around. As we think about a team of teams, the stuff from Cotter, there's lots and lots of good books. How do you teach your folks leadership? How do you give them the tools they need to move into that? How do they learn about leadership and how to lead, which is more than just saying, become a leader. And there's a lot more to it than that. And you can help them. So part of your role as a leader is to embrace that Marquet's leader model and help them become better leaders. And then help your folks do their job better. And shoot, they're the experts, but in helping them get better, who do they learn from? Where do you go? Especially, I'm going to go back to in today's remote world, how do you get people working together when there's a lot of folks that are working remote that might not work together as much as they used to work together when we were all in the same building? And that's a tough one to resolve, but maybe you need to promote more bandwidth, getting more people the access that they need to always be on video, to have video on, to have good conversations. How do you give them the other tools that they need, all the engineering tools and other tools that they need to do it, pairing them with experts, getting to the fact that they know what they're supposed to do. Not just because it's in a job description, you say, hey, did you do this? It's, look, here's how we do it here. Here's an expert, work with them. You have questions, you're going to get better at it. They're coached by an expert, they move into it. This is pair work at its best. So how do we figure that out? And then again, back to Marquet's leader model. You're modeling it. How do you personally take accountability to instill accountability in all of us? So that somebody isn't saying, hey, that's not my job. How do they get to that point where whether it's a definition of done for a story or a feature, whether it's getting something really ready to get released, all those things are accountability. And that gets into pride of ownership. How do we do this and be proud of what we're developing? And leaders, I got to tell you, this is a huge deal for leadership to help instill in all the folks that are working for you in your company. So as you take a look at that, some of the things that you can do that, afterwards, we're going to ask you as you move forward. By the way, there's always something that you could be reading or learning or asking folks participating in so you can learn more. And if you have questions like that, I always recommend go to your LACE, go to your RTEs, and help them figure out where do I learn best in our company, because they're the ones who know what are going on. But in order to do that, we're asking you to learn more. You're going to apply, bottom line, lots of ways to do that, but you're going to be constantly learning about this thing that we call lean product development, and we're using SAFe to do it. You're going to apply what you learn and figure out how do you focus more on flow of value versus control gates and waterfalls and big batches of whether it's requirements or design or code or test. Those big batches don't let you get fast feedback. So your call to action is feedback on what you do. How do you get better? We'll go to the events that you're invited to. We know that you're busy, but attend enough of them so that you understand flow better. And then keep doing that over and over again. So you're learning over time, figuring out how do I get better as a leader? Every iteration over iteration myself, every PI over PI. So all of these things are things that you can do. And again, I can't promote enough. Go to your RTs, your LACEs. They've got the folks that they go to. Rely on true lean product development materials, SAFe, agile, stuff like that, DevOps. Go to the source, figure out what the fundamentals are, and learn what you can do to help as a leader.
Awesome, John. Thank you. There's so much information in what you just shared about giving some guidance for leaders, but I want to call out one thing you really pointed out is go learn. That's where I have huge empathy for leadership, because they are very often stuck in a system that only has door number one. That door number one, behind it has phase gate, command and control, waterfall approach. And learning about door number 2 that has lean agile mindset, lean product development, different ways of thinking, building that lean agile mindset out. That's what's behind door number 2. But it's not a open the door and everything's rosy. You have to do the work. You have to put in the time to learn. And as John was saying, you have to experiment. You have to get fast feedback, rinse and repeat, apply PDCA cycles. When I know for John, I can speak for him, myself as well. When we work with clients, one of the first things we do is tell leadership, you will have to change far more than your team members do. Yes, implementing the lean agile approach, implementing SAFe is going to change how the teams work together and collaborate and so on. But it's not drastically different. It's where leadership have to really change because they pivot from directing work, looking at status reports, things like that. Instead, they're building a better system so that the teams already know what needs to be done. They know how to solve the problems, and they know who to go to when there are problems that they can't solve, that are systemic based issues that they just can't deal with. So the bottom line for this is, if you're a leader in this effort, and by leader, this isn't capital L, this is lowercase. You have a leadership position. You might be a team member that someone looks to, that many people in the organization look to as that unofficial leader. You might be a senior manager, VP, C-level, whatever it might be. Those are all lowercase L positions as well. And exhibiting that leadership aspect, understanding those 10 critical success factors, learning how you can help promote them, support them, and really focusing on that lean agile leadership aspect. How do I get better as a leader to help this become successful?